Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 2 of our reading of George Orwell's 1984, or you could also say 1984 by George Orwell. The first thing we will do is, this does say right here, all rights reserved, including the right to reproduce this book in portion thereof or any form. And we will, we'll just leave that there. In the last episode, we met Winston Smith, and that's about it. It was a lot of introductory material, and we are learning about the culture. He wrote about, in his diary, about a movie he saw of people getting killed, bombed and shot through and stuff. Really gruesome stuff. Now, as far as I know, I think that this was turned into a movie once, and I'm not sure how they handled all the violence, because there is a lot of violence in this book. Again, I do have to say that there will be some things in here that I don't agree with. Some of it's old-fashioned topics, I suppose, but there's a lot of stuff in here that I don't agree with. I will be reading it, but it's not stuff I agree with. Especially when that Jew got blown up with the bomb. That was just terrible. But I realize that the material is over the top for a reason, and it's meant for shock value. And it does make the story hit a lot home, hit home extra hard. Anyways, we left off right here where this lady, we don't know what her name is yet. She walked in, and we find out that he doesn't really like women much, because I don't know. Apparently, they're like clean-minded and anti-party or something. I don't know. Anyways, the other person was a man named O'Brien. So we just finished learning about the girl in the last one. So if you want to find out about her, then yeah. So now there's O'Brien. The other person was a man named O'Brien, a member of the inner party and holder of some post so important and remote that Winston had only a dim idea of its nature. A momentary hush passed over the group of people around the chairs as they saw the black overalls of the inner party member approaching. O'Brien was a large, burly man with a thick neck and a coarse, brutal face. In spite of his formidable appearance, he had a certain charm of manner. He had a trick of resetting his spectacles on his nose, which was curiously disarming. In some indefinable way, curiously civilized. It was a gesture which, if anyone had still thought in such terms, might have recalled an 18th century nobleman offering his snuff box. Winston had seen O'Brien perhaps a dozen times in almost as many years. He felt deeply drawn to him, and not solely because he was intrigued by the contrast between O'Brien's urbane manner and his prizefighter's physique. Much more, it was because of a secretly held belief, or perhaps not even a belief, merely a hope, that O'Brien's political orthodoxy was not perfect. Something in his face suggested it irresistibly, and again, perhaps, it was not even unorthodoxy that was written in his face, but simply intelligence. But at any rate, he had the appearance of being a person you could talk to, if somehow you could cheat the telescreen and get him alone. Winston had never made the smallest effort to verify this guess. Indeed, there was no way of doing so. At that moment, O'Brien glanced at his wristwatch, saw that it was nearly 1100, and evidently decided to stay in the records department until the 2-minute hate was over. He took a chair in the same row as Winston. A couple of places away, a small, sandy-haired woman who worked in the next cubicle to Winston was between them. The girl with dark hair was sitting immediately behind. The next moment, a hideous grinding screech as as of some monstrous machine running without oil, burst from the big telescreen at the end of the room. It was a noise that set one's teeth on edge and bristled the hair at the back of one's neck. The hate had started. As usual, the face of Emmanuel Goldstein, the enemy of the people, had flashed onto the screen. There were hisses here and there among the audience. The little sandy-haired woman gave a squeak of mingled fear and disgust. Goldstein was the renegade, the backslider, who once long ago, how long nobody quite remembered, had been one of the leading figures of the party, almost on a level with Big Brother himself, and then he had engaged in counter-revolutionary activities, had been condemned to death, and had mysteriously escaped and disappeared. The program of the 2 minutes hate varied from day to day, but there was none in which Goldstein had not the principal figure. He was the primal traitor, the earliest defiler of the party's purity. All subsequent crimes against the party, all treacheries, acts of sabotage, heresies, deviations, sprang directly out of his teaching. Somewhere or other, he was still alive and hatching his conspiracies. Perhaps somewhere beyond the sea, under the protection of a foreign under the protection of his foreign paymasters. Perhaps even so, it was occasionally rumored in some hiding place in Oceania itself. Winston's diaphragm was constricted. He could never see the face of Goldstein without a painful mixture of emotion. It was a lean Jewish face with a great fuzzy aureole of white hair and a small goatee beard. A clever face, and yet somewhat inherently despicable, with a kind of senile silliness in the long, thin nose, near the end of which a pair of spectacles was perched. It resembled the face of a sheep, and the voice, too, had a sheep-like quality. Goldstein was delivering his usual venomous attack upon the doctrines of the party, an act so exaggerated and perverse that a child should have been able to see through it, and yet just plausible enough to fill out with an alarming feeling that other people, less level-headed than oneself, might be taken in by it. He was abusing Big Brother. He was denouncing the dictatorship of the party. He was demanding the immediate conclusion of peace with Eurasia. He was advocating freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of thought. He was crying hysterically that the revolution had been betrayed, and all this in rapid polysyllabic speech, which was a sort of parody in the habitual style of the orators of the party, and even contained newspeak words. More newspeak words, indeed, than any party member would normally use in real life. And all the while, lest one should be of any doubt to the reality which Goldstein's specious claptrap covered, behind his head on the telescreens, there marched an endless column of the Eurasian army, row after row of solid-looking men with expressionless Asiatic faces, who swam up to the surface of the screen and vanished to be replaced by others exactly similar. The dull, rhythmic tramp of the soldiers' boots formed the background to Goldstein's bleating voice. Before the hate had proceeded for 30 seconds, uncontrollable exclamations of rage were breaking out from half the people in the room. The self-satisfied, sheep-like face on the screen and the terrifying power of the Eurasian army behind it were too much to be borne. Besides, the sight or even the thought of Goldstein produced fear and anger automatically. He was an object of hatred, more constant than either Eurasia or East Asia, since when Oceanus was at war with one of these powers, it was generally at peace with the other. But what was strange was that although Goldstein was hated and despised by everybody, although every day and 1,000 times a day on platforms on the telescreen, in newspapers and books, his theories were refuted, smashed, ridiculed, held up to the general gaze for the pitiful rubbish that they were. In spite of all this, his influence never seemed to grow less. Always there were fresh dupes waiting to be seduced by him. A day never passed when spies and saboteurs acted under his direction were not unmasked by the thought police. He was the commander of a vast shadowy army, an underground network of conspirators dedicated to the overthrow of the state, the Brotherhood. Its name was supposed to be. There were also whispered stories of a terrible book, a compendium of all the hearsays of which Goldstein was the author and which circulated clandestinely here and there. It was a book without a title. People referred to it, if at all, simply as the book, but one knew of such things only through vague rumors. Neither the Brotherhood nor the book was the subject that any ordinary party member would mention if there was a way of avoiding it. In its second minute, the hate rose to a frenzy. People were leaping up and down in their places and shouting at the tops of their voices in an effort to drown the maddening, bleating voice that came from the screen. The little sandy-haired woman had turned bright pink, and her mouth was opening and shutting like that of a landed fish. Even O'Brien's heavy face was flushed. He was sitting very straight in his chair, his powerful chest swelling and quivering, as though he were standing up to the assault of a wave. The dark-haired girl behind Winston had begun crying out, "Swine, swine, swine," and suddenly she picked up a heavy Newspeak dictionary and flung it at the screen. It struck Goldstein's nose and bounced off. The voice continued inexorably. In a lucid moment, Winston found that he was shouting with the others and kicking his heel violently against the rung of the chair. The horrible thing about the 2 minutes hate, was not that one was obliged to act his part, but that it was impossible to avoid joining in. Within 30 seconds, all pretense was always unnecessary. A hideous ecstasy of fear and vindictiveness, a desire to kill, to torture, to smash faces in with a sledgehammer seemed to flow through the whole group of people like an electric current, turning one even against one's will into a grimacing, screaming lunatic. And yet, the rage that one felt was an abstract, undirected emotion, which could be switched from one object to another, like the flame of a blow lamp. Thus, at one moment, Winston's hatred was not turning against Goldstein at all, but on the contrary against Big Brother, the party, and the thought police. And at such a moment, and at such moments, his heart went out to the lonely, derided heretic on the screen, sole guardian of truth and sanity in the world of lies. And yet, the very next instant, he was at one with the people about him, and all that was said of Goldstein seemed to him to be true. At those moments, his secret loathing of Big Brother changed into adoration, and Big Brother seemed to power up. No, seemed to tower up, an invincible, fearless protector, standing like a rock against the hordes of Asia. And Goldstein, in spite of his isolation, his helplessness, and the doubts that hung about his very existence, seemed like some sinister enchanter capable by the mere power of his voice of wrecking the structure of civilization. It was even possible at moments to switch one's hatred this way or that by a voluntary act, suddenly by the sort of violence effort. Give me just a sec. Sorry about that. My foot had went to sleep. Okay. Here. Where was I? Oh, here. It was even possible at moments to switch one's hatred this way or that by a voluntary act, suddenly by this sort of violent effort with which one wrenches one's head away from the pillow in a nightmare. Winston succeeded in transferring his hatred from the face on the screen to the dark-haired girl behind him. Vivid, beautiful hallucinations flashed through his mind. He would flog her to death with a rubber truncheon. He would tie her naked to a stake and shoot her full of arrows, like Saint Sebastian. He would ravish her and cut her throat at the moment of climax. Better than before. Moreover, he realized why it was that he hated her. He hated her because she was young and pretty and sexless, because he wanted to go to bed with her and would never do so, because round her sweep supple waist, which seemed to ask you to encircle it with your arms, there was only the odious scarlet sash, the odious scarlet sash, aggressive symbol of chastity. The hate rose to its climax. The voice of Goldstein had become an actual sheep's bleat, and for an instant the face changed into that of a sheep. When the sheep face melted into the figure of a Eurasian soldier who seemed to be advancing huge and terrible, his submachine gun roaring and seeming to spring out of the surface of the screen, so that some of the people in the front row actually flinched backwards in their seats, but in the same moment, drawing a deep sigh of relief from everyone, the hostile figure melted into the face of Big Brother. Black-haired, black-mustachioed, full of power and mysterious calm, and so vast that it was almost filled up with merely a few words of encouragement, the sort of words that are not uttered in the din of battle, nor distinguishable individually, but restoring confidence by the fact of being spoken. Then the face of Big Brother faded away again, and instead the three slogans of the party stood out in bold capital letters. War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. But the face of Big Brother seemed to persist for several seconds on the screen, as though the impact that it had made on everyone's eyeballs were too vivid to wear off immediately. The little sandy-haired woman had flung herself forward over the back of the chair in front of her with a tremulous murmur that sounded like, "My savior." She extended her arms toward the screen. Then she buried her face in her hands. It was apparent that she was uttering a prayer. At this moment, the entire group of people broke into a deep, low, rhythmic chant of B, 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 over and over again, very slowly, with a long pause between the first B and the second. A heavy, murmurous sound, somehow curiously savage in the background, of which one seemed to hear the stamp of naked feet and the throbbing of tom-toms. For perhaps as much as 30 seconds they kept it up. It was a refrain that was often heard in the moments of overwhelming emotion. Partly it was a sort of hymn to the wisdom and majesty of Big Brother, but still more, it was an act of self-hypnosis, a deliberate drowning of consciousness by means of rhythmic noise. Winston's enthralls seemed to grow cold in the 2 minutes' hate. He could not help sharing in the general delirium, but this subhuman chanting of B, 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 B always filled him with horror. Of course, he chanted with the rest. It was impossible to do otherwise. To dissemble your feelings, to control your face, to do what everyone else was doing, was an instinctive reaction. But there was a space of a couple of seconds during which the expression of his eyes might conceivably have betrayed him, and it was exactly at that moment that the significant thing happened, if indeed it did happen. Momentarily he caught O'Brien's eye. O'Brien had stood up. He had taken off his spectacles and was in the act of resetting them on his nose with his characteristic gesture. But there was a fraction of a second when their eyes met, and for as long as it took to happen, Winston knew, yes, he knew that O'Brien was thinking the same thing as himself. An unmistakable message had passed. It was as though their two minds had opened, and the thoughts were flowing from one into the other through their eyes. I am with you, O'Brien seemed to be saying to him. I know precisely what you are feeling. I know all about your contempt, your hatred, your disgust. But don't worry, I am on your side. And then the flash of intelligence was gone, and O'Brien's face was as inscrutable as everyone else's. That was all. And he was already uncertain whether it had happened. Such instance never had any sequel. All that they did was to keep alive in him the belief or hope that others beside himself were the enemies of the party. Besides, the rumors of vast underground conspiracies were true, after all. Perhaps the Brotherhood really existed. It was impossible. It was impossible, in spite of the endless arrests and confessions and executions, to be sure that the Brotherhood was not simply a myth. Some days he believed in it, some days not. There was no evidence, no fleeting glimpses that might mean anything or nothing. Snatches of overheard conversations, faint scribbles on lavatory walls. Once even, when two strangers met, a small movement of the hands which had looked as though it might be a signal of recognition. Okay. It was all guesswork. Very likely he had imagined everything. He had gone back to his cubicle without looking at O'Brien again. The idea of following up their momentary contact hardly crossed his mind. It would have been inconceivably dangerous even if he had known how to set about doing it. For a second, 2 seconds, they had exchanged an equivocal glance, and that was the end of the story. But even that was a memorable event in the locked loneliness in which one had to live. Winston roused himself and sat up straighter. He let out a belch. The gin was rising from his stomach. Excuse me. His eyes refocused on the page. He discovered that while he sat helplessly musing, he had also been writing, as though by automatic action, and it was no longer the same cramped, awkward handwriting as before. His pen had slid voluptuously over the smooth page, printing in large, neat capitals. Down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother, down with Big Brother. Over and over again, filling half a page. He could not help feeling a twinge of panic. It was absurd, since the writing of these particular words was not more dangerous than the initial act of opening the diary, but for a moment he was tempted to tear out the spoiled pages and abandon the enterprise altogether. But he did not do so, however, because he knew that it was useless. Whether he wrote down with Big Brother or whether he refrained from writing it made no difference. Whether he went on with the diary or whether he did not go on with it made no difference. The thought police would get him just the same. He had committed, would still have committed, even if he had never set pen to paper, the essential crime that contained all others in itself. Thought crime, they called it. Thought crime was not a thing that could be concealed forever. You might dodge successfully for a while, even for years, but sooner or later they were bound to get you. It was always at night. The arrest invariably happened at night. The sudden jerk out of sleep, the rough hand shaking your shoulder, the lights glaring in your eyes, the ring of hard faces around the bed. In the vast majority of cases, there was no trial, no report of the arrest. People simply disappeared, always during the night. Your name was removed from the registries. Every record of everything you had ever done was wiped out. Your one-time existence was denied and then forgotten. You were abolished, annihilated, vaporized was the usual word. For a moment he was seized by a kind of hysteria. He began writing in a hurried, untidy scrawl. They'd shoot me. I don't care. They'll shoot me in the back of the neck. I don't care. Down with Big Brother. They always shoot you in the back of the neck. I don't care. Down with Big Brother. He sat back in his chair, slightly ashamed of himself, and laid down his pen. The next moment he started violently. There was a knock at his door. Already? He sat as still as a mouse, in the futile hope that whoever it was might go away after a single attempt, but no, the knocking was repeated. The worst thing of all would be to delay. His heart was thumping like a drum, but his face, from long habit, was probably expressionless. He got up and moved heavily towards the door. We made it to chapter 2. We are going to pick this up when we get back, and we'll find out who's at the door. We've been reading 1984 by George Orwell. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you'll support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.